Okay, we're all set. You can go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Mission Fulfillment Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everybody. Thanks to those of you who are joining us live via the video stream. We are meeting virtually and want to remind everyone that Minnesota open meeting law provisions allow us to conduct meetings by electronic means in situations like this. A quick refresher on our protocol for this meeting for the record. All votes will be recorded by roll call as required by the open meeting law. For any action before us today, Ms. Flatten will take the roll call vote. At the start of each discussion, I will call on regents and student representatives for their questions and comments. If you don't wish to speak, you are welcome to pass. We will use this process only once per agenda item. If you have a comment or question that you believe cannot wait until your turn in the alphabet or wish to speak a second time on a topic, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom or alert Ms. Flatten via text that you wish to speak. Staff will then keep a speakers list for me. Please do not talk over others or jump in without being recognized. Regents, and we've got student representatives today. We have Mr. Kraft, Ms. Patterson, and our presenters will be muted until I call on them to speak. Please do not mute or unmute your own line. Staff will handle that for you. And also just remember, with technology, please allow for a brief pause after you are called on and before you start speaking. Finally, I'm just going to remind everyone that although we can't see our audience, they are out there. Today's meeting is live and open to the public by a live stream video. It will also be archived on our website for later viewing. So with no further introductions, I'm going to step right to the agenda items. We have actually 5 on the item today. We have an introduction, COVID-19 report, promotion and tenure, the consent report, and information items. At this time, I'm going to introduce the first item, and that is the introduction of our new Executive Vice President and Provost, Rachel Grossen. President Gable, I'll turn it over to you for this introduction.
Thank you, Chair Anderson, Vice Chair Davenport, members of the committee. I have the distinct privilege of officially introducing for the first time in this committee our new Executive Vice President and Provost, Dr. Rachel Grossen. Members of the committee, Rachel Grossen received her undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania with a dual major in economics and philosophy of science, and her PhD in economics from Harvard University. Her research is focused on behavioral and experimental economics, bargaining and negotiation, and charitable giving. She began her career at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where she served for 13 years. In 2007, she moved to UT at Dallas, where she held a joint appointment between the economics department and the Jindal School of Business. She also administered a research center there. She served a 2-year rotation at the National Science Foundation at the division as the division director for social and economic sciences, and subsequently became the dean of the College of Business at the University of Texas at Arlington. She joins us from Michigan State University, where she served as dean of the College of Social Science and MSU Foundation professor of economics. She is the winner of the 2017 Carolyn Shaw Bell Award, given annually to an individual who has furthered the status of women in the economics profession. Her teaching has focused on negotiation, experimental and behavioral economics, and behavioral finance. She's published over 70 peer-reviewed journal articles and 1 edited book across multiple disciplines, including economics, business, sociology, political science, law, and stats. She's currently serving on the AAU's advisory board on sexual harassment. Her husband of 29 years and her 2 children, aged 10 and 13, will be joining her in Minnesota over the summer. Members of the committee, I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Rachel Grossen. Rachel, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, President Gable. Provost Grossen, welcome. We're glad to have you, and we look forward to meeting you in person. You and I we've got to know each other pretty well virtually, but someday we'll meet in person. Would you like to make a few comments this morning?
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Thank you, President Gable, and thank you to members of the board. I had my first opportunity to speak with you on April 21st, but I'm delighted to be formally introduced to the Mission Fulfillment Committee today. Since we spoke over 2 weeks ago, I have continued to rely heavily on the excellent faculty, staff, students, and administrators as we work together to lead the university through these difficult circumstances. This includes President Gable and her executive team, the chancellors, vice chancellors, and their staffs, the vice provosts and associate vice presidents who are part of the provost team, and the provost office staff. I especially want to reiterate my deepest thanks to Provost Emerita Karen Hansen for her continued wise counsel every day. Thank you, Karen, for your willingness to work side by side with me, ensuring continuity during these tumultuous times, and thank you for your exemplary commitment to the University of Minnesota. Before I arrived, while I was working through the early days of the pandemic in my role as dean at Michigan State, I was especially impressed with how the leadership at Minnesota were responding to the growing crisis. While the two institutions were making roughly the same decisions at roughly the same time, the virus spread in Michigan was about 2 weeks ahead of Minnesota. So the decisions that the U were making were much more proactive relative to the environment than those at MSU. In addition, I was and I remain especially impressed by the clarity of the communications that came from President Gable and the leadership team at Minnesota. Although decisions were clearly grounded in consultative processes and academic governance, the communications provided compassionate and clear direction and ensured effective and timely change. Today, as we continue to work together on the many challenges of advancing our mission in the midst of so much uncertainty, I remain inspired by the resilience, the perseverance, and the dedication that I see all around me. This community continues to serve students and the state with vision and caring and creativity and commitment. It's demonstrated why the University of Minnesota is one of the world's great universities. I'm honored to have joined the ranks, and I'm committed to helping our faculty, staff, and students do their best work through this crisis and in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Croson. We're awful glad to have you, and you've got a big job with all the academic side of the house down there at the University of Minnesota. I do want to take just a very brief moment to teach you a little bit about Minnesota vocabulary. So I'm going to be the teacher here. Make sure you learn the words Skyma, row the boat, and go Gophers while you're here.
Skyma, row the boat, and go Gophers.
Go Gophers.
Got it.
So thank you. We're just glad to have you. We're glad to have you. Moving on to the next item. We're going to discuss the preliminary academic impact of COVID-19 on our university. And we're going to have a discussion here. This is not an action item. It's a discussion item. Joining us for this item will be President Gable, Provost Croson, Vice President Kramer, and Vice Provost McMaster. They're going to tell us some of what they know, and then we can ask some questions. President Gable, would you like to start us off again?
Yes, thank you, Chair Anderson. So the academic impacts resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic are significant, but I want to express how proud I am of the university's people and community's commitment to our academic mission in the face of this significant challenge. It's hard to believe that 8 weeks ago we were in Duluth, and the decisions we made there and over the weeks since have addressed this challenge quickly using informed decision-making, consultative processes to keep our university family healthy, safe, and well, while focusing on and advancing our academic mission. We've engaged in things like canceling all global learning abroad programs, including for May and summer, discontinuing university-sponsored travel until June 30th, and as we all know, moving to alternative modes of instruction through the end of this semester and into the summer semester. These are transformative actions by anybody's measure, and our leadership team will walk you through those steps in just a few moments. As we pivot forward, we're pushing ourselves to ask tough questions through our mission-focused working group that you approved at the special board meeting on April 21st. This is co-chaired by Provost Croson and Vice President for Research, Chris Kramer. They're relying on the principles that you adopted at our last meeting, and they're diving deeply into the short and long-term academic and research impacts of COVID-19. and are asking important questions related to the uniqueness and value of our academic mission and what that means for our broader future. Before I turn it over to Provost Croson and the other presenters, I do want to express my thanks to our students, faculty, and staff for their shared efforts, for pulling together as an unbelievable team, for communicating with a unified voice, which is critically important during these uncertain times, for their flexibility and understanding through this challenging time, and for their unbelievable commitment to this task. So with that, I'll thank you, Mr. Chair, and turn it over to the other presenters.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're going to go with Provost Croson.
Thank you, President Gable. Thank you, Chair Anderson, members of the board. You can go to the next slide. Each campus responded to Governor Walz's stay-at-home order and the university's decision to move course instruction to alternative delivery with prompt action this spring. We spoke at our previous special meeting about our plans for the summer, the training and support we were providing faculty, and the innovation we were supporting, and of course, the additional timely courses we were launching. Today, I want to talk about the spring semester, which we just completed. We took a number of administrative actions this spring to accommodate the stresses that the virus imposed. There's more detail in your docket, but some examples are listed on this slide. So we adjusted our academic policies, such as pausing academic suspensions and adjusting probation practices to acknowledge the stressors on academic performance that students experience because of COVID-19. We allowed undergraduate students on all campuses the option to take any or all classes pass-fail, SN. We recently extended the SN deadline for the Twin Cities campus undergraduates till May 22nd. University and campus leaders assessed financial policies affecting students and made several adjustments, including suspending student late fees, removing registration holds typically applied to students with outstanding balances, and proposing to this board refunds of appropriate course fees. Each campus ensured a continued mental health care for students. On the Twin Cities campus, for example, Boynton Mental Health Care and Student Counseling Services rapidly developed and deployed telehealth mental health services. The university managed the return of about 1,200 students who had been studying abroad. The Alumni Association continued with its work, connecting alumni with graduating students to help them network and launch their careers. The docket includes a link to a new website that the Alumni Association created specifically to support 2020 graduates with job placement and other services. We touched on some of the instructional support in the April special meeting, and there's more described in this meeting's docket. I want to again acknowledge the extraordinary efforts of our faculty and instructors, academic technologists and instructional designers, and of the college, program, and departmental staff and leaders across all of our campuses. I want to add to this list the important partnership we have with faculty governance. FCC Chair Amy Pittenger and others have provided extremely important leadership during this period, and her counsel has been especially valuable to me. Please go to the next slide. While you should be justifiably proud of our faculty and students and the rest of our community for making such a hard pivot to alternative delivery, I know that some instructors and students experience challenges. I believe in continuous improvement, and this is a domain where improvement is definitely possible. We thus need to assess how we did this spring and identify opportunities for improvement. Our conversation at the April special meeting about planning for a fully online summer talked about how to use the lessons of the spring to make summer instruction even better. We'll have more information available in the upcoming month, but I want to share with you a few measures that we track. So far, the data that we have is both reassuring and offers some direction for improvement. For example, we monitor activity in the university's online learning platform called Canvas. And we know that 93% of Canvas course sites were activated across the university system this spring. We use this data to monitor student engagement with the courses, which includes logging in, completing assignments, and participating in class conversation. We found that out of around 60,000 students in the system, only about 700 students had what we considered low engagement with their courses. We shared lists of those students with their respective colleges and campuses for advisors and faculty to contact directly. We monitor the number of courses dropped by students on each campus. We find no significant change this spring compared to previous semesters. Undergraduate students on all campuses who are on pace to earn a D or an F in a 1,000 level course are identified through a midterm alert system so that advisors can reach out and provide students with support. We found that the number of midterm alerts reported by instructors in spring 2020 were consistent with or lower than the number reported in 2019. We take student complaints and feedback very seriously. So far this semester, the number of student complaints, while not zero, is consistent with the number from previous semesters as well. We extended opportunities for students to switch course grade basis to pass-fail, SN, and we're monitoring this behavior closely. Typically, we'd have about 10,000 students across the system choose one or more courses to be graded SN. As of Monday, after the docket was submitted, we now have about 18,000 students compared to 10 in previous years. We're glad that we offered students this option and that we extended the time for them to exercise it. Furthermore, a notation will be added to the transcripts for the spring 2020 semester, noting the extended SN permissions. Finally, campuses and colleges collaborated to expand the Student Emergency Fund. We've awarded over 550 students across the system with over $330,000 to help with financial insecurity, and we're especially grateful for all of the donors that made that possible. You can go ahead to the next slide. Another way we assess the semester is by surveying students directly. Through a recent technology needs questionnaire to over 1,200 Twin Cities students, we found that 4.7% didn't have a reliable computer and 2.6% didn't have reliable internet access. We were able to direct those students to university resources to provide what they needed to complete their classes. Each semester, we ask students to rate the quality of their classes and their instruction. Questions from spring semester 2020 will be benchmarked against previous semester, and new survey questions will elicit student feedback about the switch to remote learning and how students perceive the level of interaction with their instructor and their peers during the semester. Preliminary aggregate results from the spring semester we're expecting later in spring 2020. The university is administering a college student health survey that will contain information about the impact of COVID-19 on students' health, including mental health. The survey uses modified questions from an earlier survey that will provide us comparisons for before and after the pandemic. That survey closed on Tuesday, so we're expecting results shortly as well. Finally, we'll administer a COVID-19 impact on the student experience survey through the CERU Consortium for graduate students and select professional students in early summer. That will allow us to benchmark the experiences of those students relative to our peers. These kinds of assessments are about looking backward so that we can improve what we do going forward. These and other initiatives are an important first step to ensure that we continually improve the education we offer, regardless of the modality through which it is offered. So next, I'm going to ask Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education, Bob McMaster, to give us an update about summer and fall enrollments.
Go ahead, Dean McMaster. Please.
Regent Anderson and members of the committee. Enrollment trends for both summer and fall continue to change on a weekly, even daily basis, so we want to provide the most current information we have. The first slide that you're looking at provides a current status of summer 2020 enrollments. As mentioned at our last meeting, each of the campuses has been carefully planning the summer curriculum. Nearly all of the campuses are up with summer enrollments, and system-wide, there's been a 14.4% increase. On the UMTC campus, the increase is a surprising 25%. This is most likely a result of students having some difficulties during the spring due to COVID-19 challenges, as well as a lack of employment opportunities for summer 2020. One note on U of M Crookston, a large number of online students typically do not register until just before the beginning of the term. Thus, UMC anticipates an increase between now and the beginning of the summer term on June 8th. Next slide. The next slide provides an update on the newest fall 2020 enrollment data. As of May 1st, thus not including confirms that have arrived over the last weekend, the total number of confirms system-wide had decreased from 9,417 to 8,578 from 2019 to 2020, or approximately a 9% dip. All campuses experienced decreases except U of M Rochester, which experienced an increase from 182 to 223 confirms, or an increase of 22%. The table shows the decreases for the other 4 campuses. We need to make several points here on the data that you're looking at. 1, 4 of the campuses have formally extended their deadlines from May 1st to June 1st, which will significantly change confirmed behavior. These campuses still will be confirming students for nearly another month. The UMTC campus, while retaining the May 1st deadline, is allowing students to extend the date out to June 1st by request. Currently, 900 students with UMTC offers have requested an extended deadline. The UMTC campus was down 4.6%, about 300 students in confirms from last year, but up 1.8%, about 112 students from 2 years ago, when we were on target to hit our 6,000 freshmen on census day. For the UMTC campus, there are close to 800 additional offers made from the wait list in late April, where students were given 2 weeks to confirm, and thus we haven't heard back on those students from those students. NR confirms were down 21%, while international confirms were down 28%. One also has to look at whether international students have a US or international address. Currently, we have 382 international NHS confirms, freshman confirms. Of these, 71 have a US address. The situation changes with transfer students, where out of 326 international NAS confirms, transfer confirms, 205 have a US address. The likelihood of yielding international students increases, obviously, if they're living in the US. We also wanted to provide context for the 4 greater Minnesota campuses. As was mentioned, U of M Morris moved their confirmation deadline to June 1st. Historically, they have a good sense of what their fall enrollment will look like around Memorial Day. Morris is also using their one-time Make a Difference funds to provide a targeted scholarship to admits within 100 miles of campus. Due to UMR's increased confirmations, there will be likely significant housing pressure if the numbers hold or continue to increase. At U of M Crookston, it should be noted that the criteria for identifying a confirm has changed over the last year. This year, a student isn't tagged as confirmed until they deposit a confirmed fee, while last year Crookston was using the "told us they were coming" message. In 2019, Crookston saw a surge of confirms around May 1st, the May 1st deadline, and expect a similar influx around the June 1st deadline this year. The Twin Cities campus has both dipped much deeper into their wait lists than previous years and has shared thousands of names with other campuses. A first list was shared on April 14th and included 1,296 students shared. A second list was shared on April 28th and included over 3,000 students. The UMTC has admitted almost 1,700 students off the wait list this year. Last year, we'd admitted 100 and has confirmed 274 of those students. At the last meeting, we provided the increased Share My App numbers for you, so I'm not going to go through those again. Next slide. Another very, very important measure for fall to fall retention is the number of students who have registered for classes. Throughout the spring, we carefully look at how fall registrations are progressing. This year, comparing fall 2019 registration and fall 2020 registration system-wide, the U of M is down only 1.2%. This, in fact, is a pretty positive sign in terms of overall retention. The largest decrease is with freshmen at -3%, followed by seniors at -1.6%, and sophomores and juniors with no real change. The lower freshman registrations for fall 2020 are undoubtedly related to the impact of the coronavirus challenge on these students. In fact, one of the things we're seeing on the Twin Cities campus is about a 2 to 3% downtick in first year retention. So those two are related. Next slide. Finally, on the Twin Cities campus, overall registration is down a similar 1.2%, with the same pattern as you saw for the system at all levels, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Vice President Chris Kramer to discuss some aspects of research activity.
Chair Anderson, I'm happy to dive in if you're ready.
Regent Anderson, are you still there? If we can just pause for a moment, we'll try to get Regent Anderson back.
Hello, Maggie, are you there?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, my screen just froze for a second. I'm fine now.
Well, Chair Anderson, members of the board, a pleasure to have a chance to talk to you today about our research operations and the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So as we adjusted in the face of the pandemic and public health guidance and the guidance from the state through the governor's executive orders, we quite rapidly pivoted from our normal research operations to go to our reduced operations, and that included the hibernation of all research activities that weren't deemed to be critical. And so critical in the final phase, if you will, was defined as anything that could directly address the COVID-19 pandemic, things that were required to maintain critical infrastructure, irreplaceable cell lines, samples, and so forth, the safety-related activities that needed to be continued, and really not much else. In the process, we also paid very careful attention to our work with human participants. And so clinical trials, for instance, were tiered based on relative benefit to the participants, and anything that did not have a really critical benefit, we eliminated face-to-face interactions in order to address the potential spread of the pandemic. In addition, we have ethical requirements with respect to the welfare of the research animals we have under our care. And so we took a proactive stance to deciding how we would address that in the event we experienced significant staffing shortages, and communicated that with all of our researchers using such animals. We also pivoted many of our compliance bodies to be as responsive as possible to research that began in order to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And that includes the Institutional Review Board for clinical trials that were being proposed, the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee for research that would involve animals addressed to COVID-19, our institutional biosafety committee for some of the issues associated with testing, for instance, that we began spinning up. Goal being to move as rapidly as possible to address the critical challenges associated with the pandemic. And then finally, we needed to keep very close track of what was happening in Washington, primarily with federal agencies that are the main sponsor of much of our research, which sort of hour by hour were adjusting their guidance on how we could expend money, where we could actually change scope of work if needed to address the COVID-19 situation, how we could pay people who might not be able to do work remotely, all that handled very ably by the folks in our sponsored projects administration. So if I could have the next slide, please. And I think what I want to say to begin is, so you'll notice my background, research is teaching UMN. Some of you have seen that graphic before. I'm temporarily going to move my head because otherwise you can't see that third little ribbon in there, all of this designed by CL Agency, a design team of undergrads in CLA, says public service. So I think we have had a unique opportunity to demonstrate just how important a research university is to a state and to show the public service we are able to contribute that nobody else can. And so, certainly in the popular press, many of you will already have seen much of what the university has done to benefit the state, the nation, the world, in terms of its research that was applied to address the pandemic. First on this list here, of course, is our testing protocols. And so we very quickly combined efforts across a range of units at the institution to create both reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, RT-PCR testing, that actually shows when people are infected with the virus and have viral samples, as well as serology testing. So that is looking for antibodies after the fact. We spun up those operations here at the university. We committed to the state and received state funding in order to do it. A very robust testing protocol that helped us get around some of the supply chain problems that I think many of you have read about in the popular press. And we anticipate being the main source of testing capacity for the near future. And that will help us in addressing return to work issues and addressing the public health issues. We also have been absolutely critical. Our School of Public Health and researchers within it have really built the models that have informed the governor and his team with respect to the relevant actions and degree of restriction on individual activities that have been announced in the various executive orders. And that level of science and evidence-based input has been simply critical to doing things right. We have many clinical trials underway. The most talked about have primarily been around the 3 drugs you see there. These primarily are addressing prophylactic approaches, so ways that one might prevent infection, ways that one can mitigate infection by treating those who are infected and perhaps lessening symptoms and improving outcomes. Some of these trials are even now beginning to announce their early results, and obviously we're all very hopeful that they will show efficacy. CIDRAP, which is our Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy Center, you heard from Mike Osterholm, Regents Professor Mike Osterholm, while you were in Duluth. You were lucky because getting on his schedule is tricky these days. He seems to be on every single news show there is 24/7. And he and CIDRAP itself are the go-to place for the compiled, reliable, science-based, evidence-based information. They are getting millions and millions of hits to their website. It is University of Minnesota is entirely on the map as the place for that kind of information. And I'm extraordinarily proud of that work. And then finally, that's really directly in the public health space, I guess, of the disease. But we should remember there are so many other aspects associated with the disease, including engineering protocols that are designed to minimize transmission. And we've done heroic work in designing hoods and masks and other things that can assist frontline healthcare workers as well as the general public. Of course, everybody has seen the story about the low-cost ventilator, which we've transferred off to some of our industrial partners, and they are building them at scale. And I'll mention that has, again, been a real success story, our ability to take some of the things we were doing in our research labs through our technology commercialization function to work with our business partners. And we signed a pledge, an autumn pledge, about how we're making all of that essentially freely available at most covering costs in order to disseminate it and get it to scale as quickly as we possibly can. In the meantime, our researchers are very actively turning their thoughts to other opportunities. The federal government has spun up some grant opportunities very quickly. I'll just mention the National Science Foundation has something called a RAPID grant, which is supposed to be rapid, not surprisingly. And we've had some great success, and that's including looking at things like vaccine strategies, other engineering strategies, detection strategies. There's a lot going on. And again, I'll just say, only a research university can do that. We are unique in that capacity. And if I could have the next slide, please. So at the moment where we are, we have, under President Gable's Sunrise Plan, coordinated with the full Emergency Management Planning Committee, which President Gable leads, we have begun the process of looking at how we can resume some of our research operations in a staged, careful, and safe way. And so we took the principles the Board of Regents adopted for how we're proceeding moving forward, and that grounds the plan. A working group of research associate deans worked terrifically hard to develop a very extensive plan in a very short amount of time, aligned with the values and objectives that the board laid out. I won't run you through the 24 assumptions that underlie the plan. They're sort of rational assumptions, things like, personal protective equipment will be hard to find for a while, and it needs to be devoted to the people who are actually doing direct delivery of healthcare until such time as the supply chains catch up. But those kinds of things inform our activities. We have a series of resumption stages. So there's a pre-restart. That's basically where we are right now. There is an early restart, a mid-restart, an approaching normalcy, and ultimately there is a normalcy. And each one of these has certain public health triggers associated with what do cases look like in the state, what is the availability of PPE, and that dictates how many people we expect we may be able to have back and working, and what are the appropriate protocols for social distancing, for disinfection. That leads to an action list. That's my last note on there, because it's not just that people are going back to their laboratory or to their site all on their own. It certainly implicates our core facilities, which are used by multiple researchers, our stock rooms that have to provide supplies, the FM staff, facilities and maintenance staff, who come in and need to clean things, common spaces. And so we're trying to be very, very mindful of that. We have a workflow process in place where each group, or actually each individual, but as part of a group often, is coming up with specific plans about how they might reoccupy their space, conforming to all those restraints that are designed to minimize transmission of the virus. I think the last thing I'll say is that another action, you've had a number of meetings and will continue where you are hearing about a sea of red, and the red numbers may have big error bars on them, but they're still red, both sides of that error bar. Research is perhaps one of the few bright spots. At the moment, we still have the same research funding we've had. No federal agency is pulling it back. And indeed, there is every possibility that the federal government will decide to invest additional research dollars. Regent Beeson has been on the board long enough, perhaps, to remember the America Reinvestment and Recovery Act, which the university competed extraordinarily successfully for a large injection, if you will, of dollars that were designed to address the effects of the recession at that time. There are 2 letters circulating, one in the House and one in the Senate on Capitol Hill right now, signed by many members, calling for $26 billion of investment in research, exactly along those lines. We're very hopeful that those will be viewed favorably, and that we're preparing ourselves to be able to compete as well as we can and use that money to address the challenges of Minnesota, the nation, and the world. So with that, I will turn it back over to Provost Croson.
Provost Croson, you're welcome to go ahead if you have something to add.
Thank you. So we spoke today about assessing the spring semester, monitoring enrollments, and positioning the university for continued excellence with research and discovery. I want to especially call out the extraordinary efforts of the faculty and academic technologists in offering remote summer courses. These courses will help students to make progress on their degrees. In addition, we have about 25 timely courses related to COVID-19, about which we're all very excited. We've added capacity to our academic technologists via external assistance because we know that faculty are committed to the educational attainment of our students, even in this distanced summer environment. We're planning on bringing all these pieces together in some ongoing conversations as we plan for fall 2020. First, you may know about our planning for a hybrid scenario that President Gabel asked me to lead. I mentioned this in our special meeting in April. We've assembled a small group of public health experts, academic leaders, and operational representatives from across the system who are looking to address how we might deliver in-person education safely. As described in the docket, this group has subdivided into 5 subgroups, each focused on a different area of academic life: classrooms, study spaces, and libraries, labs and studios, housing and dining, recreation centers, student unions, events and student groups, and outreach. We identified a set of shared scenarios ranging from almost all in person to almost all distanced, with a number in between. All these scenarios incorporate accommodations for vulnerable populations and contingency plans for potential outbreaks throughout the fall. Each subgroup is exploring each scenario in their domain. We plan to have a very rough draft by the end of next week, solicit feedback from a broader set of constituents, and have a comprehensive set of recommendations for each scenario, cutting across the domains, to President Gabel by early June to help inform you and her decisions moving forward about fall. Second, Vice President Kramer and I are chairing an academic and research planning work group to advise the President about academic and research planning strategies that will advance the university in the midst of the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. This group is parallel to the finance and operations work group, but is tracking about a week or 2 behind them. As with that group, we're being guided by the board-approved principles from the April special meeting that Vice President Kramer mentioned. Our orientation is to consider the goals in the strategic plan as our objectives and consider how to best prioritize our expenditures in light of the financial challenges we anticipate COVID-19 will bring in a way that ensures that we meet those goals. That group is scheduled to meet together tomorrow afternoon, pending our board scheduling, and to solicit broader impacts next week. Again, our goal is to have a recommendation for President Gabel in early June. There are many other efforts underway in planning for the fall. Go ahead to the next slide. As one example, I'll mention the growing realization that incoming international students who are not currently in the US are facing challenges with getting visas issued and may not be able to travel to campus in the fall. Leaders across campus are working to provide options for those students to make progress on their degrees, even while outside the United States. You can go ahead to the final slide. This is a challenging time for the university, but we'll resolve to use what we've learned from the spring in combination with all the information we can obtain about the future to position us for future academic excellence through research and student learning. Vice President Kramer, Vice Provost McMaster, and I look forward to your discussion and are happy to answer questions. Thank you, Chair Anderson and members of the board. This concludes our remarks.
Thank you, Provost Croson and all the presenters. It was terrific. So colleagues, there you have it. COVID-19, how it's affected us in enrollment, research, academics. Again, this is not an action item, it's an information item. So we're going to go on to a discussion. I'm going to call on regents in alphabetical orders. Following the regents, I'll call on the student representatives to the board. And we might as well get started. If you have a question or a comment, please be happy to share it. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Chair Anderson and Vice President Kramer. I do remember ARRA, and I also remember the 6th financial crisis that vividly over my work career, and that was certainly one of them. Thank you for your report, and thank you for all the work for folks that are affiliated with research. One of the things that I've been surprised with and frankly disappointed with is the lack of mentioning of America's research universities by the federal administration and by Congress, both as to the role we play in this area and the need for additional funding. It's really been quiet, and maybe that's because they're in the moment and they're dealing with the crisis, but they're really, I expect and hope for a more strategic approach to how we deal with virus and communicable diseases and the role that American universities can play as we go forward as really a sort of a Marshall Plan, if you will, in dealing with this in the future. Again, other than sort of universities' roles in the moment, public health related, or these emergency grants that are furthering, that are working on vaccines and treatments, I'm just not seeing a lot of discussion in Washington about the role of American universities. I did want to ask the Vice President about maybe he could describe a little further the role that we're playing on vaccine development right now. Are they is it with a cohort of other universities as part of a national trial, or are we doing some of these on our own? Thank you.
That is to Vice President Kramer.
Thank you, Chair Anderson and Regent Beeson. So with respect to vaccine research, we span kind of a broad range. So without going into all the details of the biochemistry, if you will, a vaccine essentially functions by tricking your body into believing that it's been infected in such a way that you raise an antibody response that's potentially protective. And there are many different molecules, if you like, on the surface of a virus, inside a virus, which might raise that response. And there are interesting questions about which ones will be most effective in terms of then being able to target an actual viral particle. So we have folks in our College of Pharmacy, for instance, who are looking at the different proteins, glycoproteins on the surfaces. This, as you say, is a worldwide endeavor. So while there are some who are launching up novel ideas individually, there certainly is collaborative work going on as well. We do not yet, to the best of my knowledge, have a proposed clinical trial that actually involves testing in individuals of vaccines. It's a very early stage for that. I think if you did have Mike Osterholm here instead of me, I'll do my best to channel him. He would tell you that there's a lot of hype about vaccines right now coming super fast, and the odds of that happening are actually really, really low, not just because the science is hard, but because you need to make 8 billion doses, and it turns out it's pretty hard to build the capital to do that really quickly. So we're doing important fundamental work. We'll continue to do that, and I think we'll have an opportunity to have a leadership role in that respect, but I do want to keep expectations realistic.
Thank you, Vice President Kramer.
Mr. Chair.
Regent Beeson, any more from you?
Just follow up. Thank you, Vice President. Maybe you could touch on treatments and more on dealing with conditions. Any specific research going on there?
Vice President Kramer.
Chair Anderson, Regent Beeson, I'm happy to do my best to address that. I will, of course, say that my colleague Jakob Tolar is the real expert, and I encourage you to maintain contact with him as well. But the one that's probably most noteworthy is the remdesivir trial, which we were part of a multi-site trial on, has had its initial results assessed. It is one of the really high quality trials. It's double blind. Neither the physicians nor patients know whether they're getting the drug or a placebo. That was run by NIH, which has reported some promising early results in terms of improved clinical outcomes, shorter times to release of those patients. That's actually in patients who are really quite ill, so that's a fairly small population, but obviously for those patients, it's a really critical intervention. I would say that the word is still out on most of the other trials, as the hydroxychloroquine, obviously probably people have seen a lot in the popular press. There are a lot of kind of small studies, and it's hard to assess the statistical relevance of those results. We were part of a more comprehensive study. I think to date, it's still a little bit uncertain. There probably is not, it hasn't been a silver bullet. There's nothing game changing necessarily there, but I think some more analysis needs to be done about whether specific populations where that may be helpful.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Kramer. Regent Beeson, anything else?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. And We're going to move on. It'll be Regent Davenport. Do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Chair Anderson, and thank you to the presenters for that excellent report reflecting the excellent work. I continue to have confidence with our response to the conditions related to the COVID and have no further questions. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Regent Hurt.
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Chair, for Vice Provost McMaster. With regards to enrollment, are there any red flags, or are we on trend with regards to enrollment at the specific school? Is there any school that is higher in enrollment, or is everything on trend?
Vice President McMaster, and I think that not only is our different campuses, but I think she's asking about the different schools within the campuses.
Yes, I'm asking for, within the schools.
Chair Anderson, Regent Her, just one quick comment on the different campuses. I think as you saw, overall there's been a trend downward in terms of confirms. However, as we also mentioned, because we're really a month out from the real deadline now, we're in a different position temporally than we were a year ago. And so we're just going to have to wait on that until we get into probably the second or third week of June to really know where we stand this year. In terms of the colleges, I can just talk about the colleges within the campuses, the Twin Cities. We have 2 or 3 colleges that are overbooked in terms of the enrollments. Science and engineering, once again, is very full. The College of Education is very full. The College of Design actually is getting near capacity. We still have some room in other colleges. So as is the case every year, because we admit to 8 freshmen admitting colleges, you're going to find some that are overflowing and some where there's a bit more capacity. And in those areas we have more capacity, that's where we're dipping into the wait list now as best as we can to fill up those colleges. The other one that's actually at capacity now is the School of Nursing, but that's pretty small. They bring in 118 freshmen a year.
Thank you, Vice President McMaster. Does that answer your question, Regent Herb?
It does. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Vice Provost.
Terrific, terrific. I will just add that knowing Vice President McMaster, we're probably getting filled with geography majors too. Regent Hsu, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. I have a couple questions relating to enrollment, and then also some questions for the Vice President for Research. So if you could go back to the slides on the enrollment. I think your presentation has slides that are newer than the ones that are actually in the docket, unless I'm looking at an old docket. But if you could put up the slide, I can't even tell you the page number. But.
Is that possible, technology people?
I think Regent Hsu wants slide 6, if I'm correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is one of the slides I was talking about, or I was thinking about. Now, clearly, it looks like our problem in the Twin Cities is about 500 students, and I understand that the deadline has been extended. And I guess piggybacking on Regent Her's question, do we have a college breakdown for the Twin Cities? I think you said nursing was full. I didn't pick up on what other colleges you said were full. If you could maybe go through that again.
Sure.
Go ahead, Vice President.
Yeah, Chair Anderson and Regent Hsu. In terms of where we are with the colleges, and I don't have the data in front of me, so I'm gonna have to pull this out of my memory. I looked at it a few days ago. Science and engineering is going to be on track to meet their targets easily. College of Education is actually overbooked now in terms of number of confirms. Nursing is at capacity. We really can't take any more nurses. College of Liberal Arts can take some more students. We actually increased their target this year because we moved 100 nursing students out of CLA over into the College of Nursing. So we do have some more capacity there, Regent Shu. Again, design is kind of reaching their limit now. They can take a few more. CFANs can take some additional students. I can't tell you how many. And Carlson, interestingly, is just a little low now, but our sense is they're going to fill up in the next few weeks. The problem is, in terms of predicting where we're going to be now, we have these 1,700 offers that are out. That's an enormous number of offers that are on the table going into May. And so we're really going to have to see how all that sorts out over the next few weeks. But I think that's kind of a good sense of where we are with the colleges. Again, our admissions office just does a spectacular job at taking all the student applications that come in, and students apply to a first choice college and then a second choice college, and sorting them into the bins and trying to make sure over the months of February through end of April, we can fill up all the buckets. And we can't always fill up all the buckets, but we try to get close. And of course, the real target is the freshman class. And the goal there is 6,000 students, maybe a few more on the 10th day, the census day.
Thank you, Vice President McMaster. Regent Shu, do you want to follow up with anything?
Yeah, yes, please, Mr. Chair. Thank you. On the same line here of thinking, I've talked to a number of prospective freshmen, and I know that we have a number. I'm hearing from them, and they're telling me that they're paying deposits at multiple schools, which I think is traditionally less common. So I think we are going to be faced with a deeper summer melt, if you will, and especially since we haven't made a decision on whether or not we're going to be in person in the fall. Are there any numbers we should be thinking about in terms of what the summer melt is going to look like for some of these colleges and campuses?
Vice President McMaster.
Sure. Chair Anderson and Regent Shu, that's actually a terrific question that we just spent some time talking about, Provost Croson and me and admissions. Traditionally, overall, I'm not talking college by college now, I'm talking overall for the Twin Cities campus, our melt has been between 5 and 7%. Closer to 5% really over the last few years. We've actually had pretty low melt. So we, in terms of our modeling, have doubled that for the summer. So we're anticipating that we could hit a summer melt rate as high as 10% for all the reasons that we know about, financial pressures and students changing their mind and maybe deciding not to go to college to take a gap year. So as we look at that target of 6,000 or so, a bit more, we actually have a target that's 10% higher than that to account for the fact that in the worst case, we'll lose 10% of the class. Now, we're certainly hoping, Regent Shu, we're not going to go higher than a 10% melt rate. But that's kind of where we are now with our thinking.
Regent Shu, more questions?
Yeah. So we've talked about the fact that we've frozen tuition, but we haven't really talked about the fact that we could actually reduce tuition for the fall, and especially reducing tuition if there's a situation involving in-person classes, because that's really the situation that a lot of people are thinking about. In addition to the fact that I think if you look at the projections and based on what Vice President Kramer was talking about in terms of vaccine development, it looks really unlikely that we're going to have a vaccine for the fall. But I have a question for him later about that. The question is, you know, we now have a new provost who is an economist, which I'm actually kind of thrilled about, because the economists should be telling us or building the models, telling us, you know, if in fact we should be reducing tuition in the fall to try and maximize the number of students that we're going to actually have either online or on campus. And my other point here would be that if we do actually go online, remain online for the fall, we actually have greater capacities than we would otherwise traditionally. And that's something we should be thinking about, because that's a way of actually bringing in more students to the university, which I think is something that we had actually discussed before the pandemic. So if you guys could maybe give me a little bit of a soundbite or two about whether or not the discussion of reduced tuition for the fall, either for in-person classes or online classes, that would be helpful.
Regent Shu, I'm just going to mention here, you know, we are talking budget and finances this afternoon. I mean, this is somewhat of an enrollment question, but if somebody could answer it fairly briefly, and then let's move on. You had another question for Senior Vice President Kramer, correct?
Yes, just quickly.
So is there somebody that can answer the financial question about, I mean, I think it's simple economics. The less we charge, the more students we'll have. I think that's pretty fair, you know, but there's other things going on here. Why don't we move it right to Vice President Kramer? Why don't you ask Vice President Kramer what you had? Because I'm not so sure we have the financial people on board with us here to answer the financial question.
Okay, I'll ask it later. So regarding the vaccine question, vaccine development question, I know you talked a little bit about the hype of vaccines, but let me just ask you point blank, you know, how do you see us having in-person classes in the fall or spring for that matter without a vaccine available?
Vice President Kramer.
Chair Anderson and Regent Shu, I'm not sure that any public health professional, I hesitate to channel public health professionals, not being one myself. Many things begin these days with, I'm not an epidemiologist, but however, I haven't seen any statement from someone in the public health sphere that has said higher education should not resume in person in the absence of a vaccine in the fall. I think there are many mitigation strategies that address disease progression and different populations, obviously associated with operations that can be protected differentially, that all need to be taken into consideration. I guess I don't think it's a vaccine only thing, although I'll point out, in spite of the fact that I was just promoted to Senior Vice President from Vice President, that decision is a bit above my personal pay grade.
I appreciate that answer, and I apologize for calling you Vice President instead of Senior Vice President, and I am impressed on how you can channel so many people. Regent Shu, do you want anything else to say before we move on to the next region?
No, except congratulations on your promotion. I really didn't realize that either, so thank you.
All right, thank you, Regent Shu. Thank you, Senior Vice President Kramer, for answering those questions, and we'll move on to Regent Kenyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are also related to enrollment, and Regent Shu preempted some of them. The first one, I guess, is from a system perspective, how are we thinking about how those levers affect us as a system? So example, extending some of the decision deadlines and digging deeper into that wait list than we would. Is there any information on whether or not some of those students are actually prospective students for elsewhere in the system, and seeing how that may affect some of those other campuses? And then the second question, a little more related to kind of what Regent Shu was getting at. Previously, in one of the emergencies meeting, we saw the worst case scenario, or the best case scenario, middle case, and the worst case. Is there a model like that for enrollment? Maybe there's not, and I don't even know how you would model that, but if we had a hybrid situation, we expect enrollment to drop by this percentage. And if we were fully remote, we expect it to drop by this percentage.
And is that for Senior Vice President McMaster? Vice President
McMaster, yes. Yes.
Vice President McMaster.
Chair Anderson and members of the committee, I would like to point out that Chris Kramer got a promotion, but I think I got a demotion from Vice Provost to Vice President, but that's okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
So to answer your first question, Regent Kenyanya, the interactive effects are really unknown right now as we move into May because of the Share My App numbers that are way up, although as of now, we haven't seen a lot of confirm activity off the Share My App on the other campuses, but more importantly, the wait list. So as we move into May, with the Twin Cities having 1,700 names total, I guess about 800 on the wait list that we've made offers to, there likely could be an effect on the other campuses because some of the names that are shared from the wait list are being considered by multiple campuses, including the Twin Cities. So I think when all is said and done, and we get to the end of May, we're going to have to sit back and look at, in terms of the wait list data, what was the behavior of students? So I really can't answer that question right now, other than to say there is likely to be some effect from there certainly will be an effect from moving the deadline. There's no question about that. But there's also likely to be an effect from the different behavior on the wait list. In terms of the models, and I'm going to ask Provost Croson to comment on this as well, we have been working on a set of enrollment models that are best case, middle case, worst case, that are often tied to the finances. Right now, I think we've moved beyond the middle case, on the Twin Cities at least, and are kind of in the area between the middle case and the best case. The best case was actually kind of landing the class we had 2 years ago, the 6,000, which is the target. So in the next month or so, I think we'll definitively have the data on where we are within that scenario of middle case to best case. But perhaps Provost Croson would want to comment on that.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Provost Croson. Too many titles here. Provost Croson, did you want to comment?
Chair Anderson, Regent Kenyanya, thank you. Yes, so we've been doing pretty extensive modeling, and as Vice Provost McMaster mentioned, those enrollment models is what feeds into Senior Vice President Burnett's projections on the financial side. So those two are consistent with each other and sort of working hand in hand.
That makes sense. Mr. Chair?
Okay, one more, Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you. I back to the enrollment issue. I would just say, I think, we've been talking system enrollment and Share My App and that kind of stuff a lot, and it has gotten better. But when I first asked about it months ago, last summer, I think the answer was, a lot of those students right at the beginning of the wait list for science and engineering, Carlson or whatever, aren't always considering other system campuses. They're considering Iowa, Wisconsin, whatever. I think there might be a point to that. Maybe it's true, but certainly in this more restricted market that we're going to have this year, if we're digging lower into that list, I think that's going to become less and less true. And if you're a Twin Cities admissions professional, then yeah, your job's to go recruit those students from the Twin Cities campus, and that's their job, and they should do it as best as they can. But for those at the system level that are thinking at the system level, provost, vice provost, I'd hope that we're considering that more and just taking that into more consideration. But thank you for the answers.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on. And again, we're going to look at the time here. We're going to get everybody in. But Regent Myron, if you would like to have a question or comment.
Thank you. First of all, let me just say I am struck by the complexity of the issues that you are facing and trying to come up with models and predictions and ultimately a work product that the university can rely on and we can rely on as well. It is at times mind-boggling, and kudos to all of you who are working in a space that I don't think any of you ever anticipated that you would be in. That's my overall comment about it. My questions have to do with making sure I understand perhaps a cause and then effect. So on what I understand, you were saying, Provost McMaster, on the wait list, that this is a larger wait list than we've ever had in the past. And my first question is your assessment that that wait list is driven by the COVID-19 pandemic, or were there other drivers that created this scenario that we're now facing? That's my
Vice
first
Provost
question, and then I have a second one.
Okay. Vice Provost McMaster.
Chair Anderson, Regent Mayron, I think with a high degree of confidence, I can say yes, that because of the behavior of students in the spring and a lot of students changing their mind about going to college in the fall, and a lot of intense competition, that it's more difficult to land a class, especially with the kind of metrics that we've over the last 10 years been that the students have had, high ACTs and GPAs. So absolutely, I think as a result of that, we have had to turn to the wait list in a much different way than we've ever had to before. As I mentioned last year, we only pulled 100 students off the wait list. And so the behavior has changed, and I think there are probably other factors as well, but I think your instincts here are correct.
And my second question, thank you. Thank
Yep.
you, Regent Anderson. Thank you, Provost McMaster. So my second question is, do you have a sense yet of what the makeup of the student body is going to look like come fall? In other words, I'm beginning to envision, given constraint, we don't know yet whether it's going to be in-person, online, hybrid, et cetera. We don't know yet what it's going to look like in terms of being able to offer students on-campus residences. Is the makeup looking more local and more like a commuter campus, for example, in the Twin Cities, and similarly for Duluth, it seems to be drawing more proximate to the Duluth area, where, if necessary, students would be living at home as opposed to on campus? Any sense about what the makeup is going to look like come fall, based on what we know with acceptances?
Vice Provost.
Chair Anderson, Regent Mayron, yes, absolutely. There's going to be a different configuration with the geography. Already we know we're going to have fewer international students. That's going to be down significantly. Already we know we're going to have fewer national students, NRNR students. That's going to be down. Right now it's 20-25%. So we are going to be a more regional and local university. Interestingly, we have an increase in reciprocity students this year. That's been kind of tracking for most of the year. And I'd like to give you a clear answer as to why mostly Wisconsin students have gravitated towards the Twin Cities. I can't, although it may be to your point that students are likely to stay local because of COVID-19. And so Wisconsin students who do want to get away, but not too far, are looking for the Twin Cities. We have more Minnesota residents. So the spheres of geography have certainly changed this year, maybe significantly over the last 5 to 10 years.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Quick one. Yep.
Yeah, quick one then. So has that impacted the marketing that the university is doing this year? In other words, if the thinking is that people are going to look more local, then focusing our marketing efforts in the Twin Cities more locally on the individuals' high schools in the urban suburban areas, and Duluth, Morris, et cetera, much more proximate focused advertising.
Vice Provost McMaster.
Yes, Chair Anderson, Regent Mayron, the answer to that is absolutely. the admissions office has shifted their priorities and is spending a lot more energy on Minnesota residents in particular, and reciprocity. One of the challenges we have is that our regional recruiters in Los Angeles and the New York metro area and Texas and Chicago, they've been grounded. They can't go out and recruit, and so they have to do it all virtually. Absolutely, we've had to kind of shift the emphasis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Now we're going to go to my colleague from up in the North Woods, if Regent McMillan is still there and have any comments or questions.
I'm still here, Chair Anderson. Thank you. And I have two questions, or two sets of questions. One for our Senior Vice President of Research, and the other is related to capacity and online teaching, picking up on what I think was an inference or something that Regent Hsu was getting at. And I'll ask that one first. And I don't know if this is President Gable or Provost or Vice Provost, but I think it's a common belief, but not an actual reality, that when we move a course online, it doesn't automatically mean we have added capacity. That online actually, my understanding and learning over the last couple of months, sometimes means reduced capacity because it's a more intensive teaching learning relationship. And I'm not trying to critique anything Regent Hsu said. I just think there's complexities in all these relationships, both how we offer, how we teach, how we price. And if we're going to get into pricing further, we probably better look at markets and look at places like Duluth, where we're dramatically over market, before we look at places like the Twin Cities. You know, we could argue about market all day and what it is. I just hesitate, and I'm looking for commentary on the capacity piece, not on the pricing piece, whether I'm reading that right. In some cases, maybe we can teach more, but my sense is it's harder online.
And that question is to who, Regent McMillan?
I don't know which one. Maybe President Gable or our Provost, either one. I don't know if my assumption right or my belief.
Or maybe it's just a comment by Regent McMillan. And why don't you go on to your next question, Regent McMillan? We'll see.
My next question is then for our research leader, and that is how, and we may not have time to really dig into this, but it seems like a complex and challenging endeavor to try and rank research projects and opportunities as essential. And I was curious for a little bit of color behind that as to how you do that. And then as you use the term hibernation, as projects come out of hibernation, will there be a similar, ranking to get things going? Are there relatively essential projects and projects that are non-essential? And let me bring this one to life really quickly. I'm on a Lake Owners Association board up here in northern Aiken County, and somebody asked me the other day if the university was going to stop its AIS research, because that's super important in these parts of the world. And I didn't attempt to answer, and I'm not going to raise that specifics in anything I'm doing up here. But how do you go about doing that, Vice President Kramer? That sounds complicated and sounds uncomplicated to unwind too, or to unhibernate.
Senior Vice President Kramer, do you want to answer that if you can?
Yes, for the record, though, I'm just going to clear up the jocularity on title. I was joking about having been referred to as Senior Vice President. I'm still just a lowly, regular old Vice President. The best title of all is Professor. Y'all are welcome to call me Professor anytime. That's a great one. So, Regent McMillan, thank you for that question. It does turn out, as a matter of fact, that the report I referred to from the Council of Research Associate Dean's Working Group goes into quite a bit of detail about how to prioritize when you have to make a decision, perhaps, between two different projects based on available resources, wanting to keep personnel density down. And that includes, I'll just read a few from it, being necessary for timely graduate student completion, hard deadlines from project sponsors for the research to be wrapped up, for instance, or to support another work proposal. Inherent urgency. So some of our work is seasonal. If you can only do it during a planting phase because it's agricultural work, well, that ought to be prioritized over things that don't necessarily have that urgency. Benefit to society. So I did mention that even when we were at our highest level of hibernation, anything that had the potential to address the COVID-19 pandemic itself was deemed worthy of the risk because of the potential outcome. There's some analysis, of course, of just how long a project can continue without necessarily being reinitiated, because it doesn't have things like sensitive timeline, and those are sort of the lowest priority when that can happen. And then finally, there is the resource issue. If you need clinical grade PPE and it's a research that doesn't address COVID-19, then we're just not going to let that happen because of the demand for that PPE for the healthcare workers.
Thank you. Regent McMillan,
Thank
before
you.
I let you talk again, I'm going to tell that President Gable has her hand up to answer that question on what I would term the elasticity of pricing, demand, and cost or capacity. So President Gable, if you're still there and want to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Yes, I'm here. Not sure where I'd go, but just very quickly, in the interest of time, I want to affirm what Regent McMillan essentially stated in the form of a question, which is that being online is not an automatic for an increase in capacity, and depending on subject matter often goes in reverse, having taught online myself since 1998. It depends very much on the type of course and the methodology or pedagogy that the faculty member is using. And we are only going to teach online if we can retain quality. And so there are cases where being online allows for an increase in capacity, but that is not a presumption and varies widely depending on the class. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Regent McMillan, is that it for you?
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good to see you, albeit virtually. Regent Powell, you are next on my list.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. First of all, I also just want to thank the team for very good presentations and good thinking, and giving the board a very clear framework for how to think about all of this. These are really tough problems, and I find it all really helpful. I have a couple of questions. One for Vice Provost McMaster, and it has to do with the enrollment. Again, we've talked a lot about the freshman class. He can comment on this, but it looks to me like there's a little upside there from where we are now, and I would appreciate his thought on that. But I'd like him, if he would, to take a larger view of total university enrollment, and if he is willing to give us some perspective on how that is likely to shake out. I mean, it looks like freshmen are particularly, it's a tricky decision for them, but it looked like the numbers for all the other class enrollments are pretty solid. And if he'd be willing to give us a view on how to think about total enrollment for next year, that would be helpful, I think. And then the other question is for either or both President Gable and Provost Croson. And that's really what they're hearing, what their sense is of peer institutions. I know they're not responsible for what our peers do, but I know they're also in conversation with them all the time, and maybe they can give us some perspective on, how they think peers are approaching these problems, and that might be helpful for us to hear. And then finally, if Professor Kramer, just a clarification, he talked about potentially $20 or $30 billion more in research funding. Is that really just a pandemic-related funding, or would that be a broad overall increase in federally available research dollars? So those are my questions, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, sir. We'll go to, do we want to get Vice Provost McMaster to answer the enrollment one? And then following him, we'll go, just as you asked, to President Gable and Provost Croson, and finally to Professor Kramer. I'm looking for Vice Provost McMaster first, I think.
Chair Anderson and Regent Powell. Unfortunately, I dropped my crystal ball this morning, so I'm having a hard time in getting to a full answer there. But in terms of the freshman class, my gut reaction is we're going to be down. We're down 9% now overall. The question is, how much of that can we close between now and June 1st? So without the crystal ball, I'd say we're probably going to be down 3 or 4%. I don't think we're going to make it all up, but I think we are going to make up some ground. One also, to my previous point, has to look at the changing geography, because you, of course, have different tuition dollars attached to the different geographies. And so you have to start to account for that. Although, if you look, for instance, at NR&R, we're down on NR&R, so we're down on NR&R tuition, but we push out a fair amount of discounting and scholarships to those students, so we won't be pushing that out. So there's a take back on that. Right now, I'm feeling really good about the rest of the class, the sophomores, juniors, and seniors, based on the data that you saw earlier. Although it's fragile, it's very fragile. These are students who have registered for the fall, but if things continue to deteriorate financially over the summer, or a parent loses a job, I think we're going to be in tough shape. So one of the things that, from the standpoint of the Provost's office, we have to do is to redouble our efforts to increase emergency funds. We'll have the CARES Act money that comes in that we'll be able to use for some of this, especially for students over the spring. But we're just going to have to absolutely redouble our efforts, triple our efforts around retention of students, to prevent summer melt, not only at the freshman level, but at the overall level. So there's going to be a drop. I think that's inevitable. I think that's going to happen with every university in the country, but it's what we can do collectively to prevent that from being, I'm going to make up a number, any more than 3 or 4%. Is that helpful?
It is. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So President Gable, do you want to try the question relating to how are we with our peers and what are we learning from our peers?
Yes, thank you, Chair Anderson. Regent Powell, I'll pick up where Bob left off and remind the board that what Bob is describing is included in the modeling that you're going to hear about when we get to finance and operations, that everything he has said is already taken into consideration in everything you'll hear in a few minutes. And with that said, yes, we're in regular contact with our peers. We have our conference, the Big Ten. We are members of the AAU, presidents and chancellors, and all of the other vice presidents have their affinity groups within both the conference and the AAU, and we're members of the APLU, and we're all talking regularly. We have shared pain, as all of society and all of our communities do, around what is going on. You won't be surprised to hear that our experts that Vice President Kramer referred to earlier are relied upon nationally, just as we do all of the time, consult with them and rely on them for the decisions that we're making. And I'll go into more detail about that when I make my report. And they are all modeling a range for the fall in the way that we are. People are approaching it differently. You're starting to see some geographic differences around the country. But everyone is looking at their range based on their opportunities, their campus infrastructure, what the data shows, what the scientists show, the capacity of their faculty, the demand of the students, the types of programs they offer, and looking at the intersections. And then as we get closer to the date, in the way that the provost described, to where we need to make a decision so that people can make their plans and we can rely on the best science available, we will rely on all of that common practice as it's emerging, and will be consultative throughout the entire course of that decision-making process.
Thank you. So Senior Vice President Kramer, do you remember the third part of the question having to do with technology?
I do indeed, Chair Anderson and Regent Powell. The current letter that's circulating in Congress, those 26 billion, are designed in part to supplement existing grants, because the agency guidance allowed us to pay people who were unable to do work on those grants if they were forced to be remote. And so that means the funds were expended, but the work didn't get done. So the intent to sort of backfill and permit that as part of that money. There's also money in there to be sort of emergency relief for major core facilities and research facilities that weren't able to recoup charges, for instance, and cover their fixed costs. And then finally, it's being used to fund additional graduate student and postdoctoral fellowships, primarily to be sure that students who might have been delayed in their graduation or in their training will still have enough money to complete. So what I would say is that the view of our advocacy organizations, the AAU, ACE, and so forth, is this is sort of a step one. It kind of addresses getting us back to where we were, but I think that there is a hope that there would then be a subsequent investment that would be more across the board in a range of different research operations, much the way that ARA money was, and would be larger in magnitude. When you look at some of the bills that have passed that have addressed other sectors of the economy, of course, they've been substantial.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to go on. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things quick, like I want a very narrow question, then kind of a broader question. So when we saw the numbers related to the Rochester campus, Vice Provost McMaster, do we know that the success of that campus, which is as a percentage is pretty good, do we know, is there a local flavor to that increase in enrollment? I mean, it seems like there's a couple things that could happen here. One is obviously, medicine, healthcare is very much on the mind of the world, and that could potentially cause an increase in interest in what is going on our Rochester campus. And I would hope that they're taking advantage of that to try to drive people to what is a very critical sector of our economy. But then it's also the fact that Rochester is actually a larger metro area than Duluth, and you were talking about a couple hundred students versus Duluth being in the thousands. Where there is somewhat of a local interest in the campus. Do we know what that increase in numbers is coming from?
Where they're coming from? Where they're coming from?
Yeah, well, what is driving the success on that campus in this time?
Vice Provost McMaster, any comment on that?
Chair Anderson and Regent Rocha, I do not have a definitive answer on that, but I think certainly it's the product that Rochester has on the table. Health sciences has become a very attractive kind of major for undergraduates. A, because it's an interesting field to go into. B, students know they can get pretty good jobs when they complete that degree. So I think that whether the major they have on the table is intrinsically attractive for undergraduates. And they do a terrific job at UMR marketing and advertising that degree. Just a terrific job. I can't comment on the geography, whether it's an Olmsted County. Did I get my county right for Rochester?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Or whether it's a regional attraction. I don't know that.
Okay, thank you. And Regent Rocha, you had another question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to close that out, it just seems to me that particularly when you have a lot of people moving home, a lot of people potentially staying home, again, you got over 100,000 people in that metro area, it would seem that we would have that opportunity to really take advantage of that interest and to drive some of that cost per student down. And at the same time, the impact of the university and the support for the university, I think, would grow. City's campus, the largest number, what percentage have been offered admission?
Provost McMaster, do you know that?
Mayor Anderson, Regent Rocha, I don't know that now because of all the waitlist offers that went out. I had that number in my head probably a week or so ago, so I can get back to you on what the yield rate is.
Mr. Chair,
very much.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Regent.
The reason I asked the question is that when we look at, I'm not clear on what our directive has been, if the board has really given a signal, and maybe this is a question for President Gable or Chair Powell. But this seems to be the time for us to have the conversation about what our strategy is in terms of admission. And of course my view on this is colored a bit by the fact that during my era, our overall ACT score was substantially lower than it is now, but that's because the university played a bit of a different role. But even now, if we came down 2% or 2 ACT points on an average, we would still have an ACT average that is roughly 5 higher than it was at that point, and we still turned out exceptional graduates and were ranked very similar to where we are now. But you see across the country, people are talking about that some of those metrics being sort of either paused or potentially moved past. And so I guess my view is that we have the ability to prevent that 3% melt. We have the ability to maximize and fill all of our programs. And I'm wondering, does this board have an opportunity to have a conversation about whether that is the right strategy? I'm giving you an inkle of where I am on this, right? But I think that from the financial standpoint, from access to students, we're going to be at the legislature asking for support. And we see what things are looking like over there. Does this board have an opportunity to be part of a conversation right now? Because now is when it makes a difference. It's not going to make a difference in July nearly as much as it would now. To say, our directive is we need to maximize offer admission to students that we reasonably believe have the ability to be successful. We're not going to. It's focused on this metric this cycle because of the extraordinary circumstances, and for the good of the university, for the good of those students, and for the good of our relationship with the state.
Regent Rocha, you make good points. The good points. Are you addressing that as a question to anybody on the panel, or do you want to say that and move forward?
I would refer that to Chair Anderson. If you think that's something maybe to turn to Chair Powell, if it should go to President Gable, I think. But I mean, I really do believe that this is
I think
this is the $100 million question for the university right now.
But there's great points there, but I think in this discussion, the next 10 minutes, they're not going to get answered, if you agree with me.
And frankly, Mr. Chair, I wasn't asking for an answer to the question or a resolution to the issue. I was asking whether we're going to have a chance to.
Okay, and that's good thought point for all of us. That's good thought points for all of us. President Gable, do you have anything to say that? Will we get a chance to discuss that at some point, or where would that come in on? Is it mission? Is it finance? Where might that be?
Thank you, Chair Anderson and Regent Rocha. As you might imagine, developing strategy and pivoting strategy has been a tremendous part of our conversation over the last couple of months in a variety of spaces, not the least of which was admissions, with great appreciation to our entire admissions team who've put us really in tremendously good position relative to our peers. As you know, many of our peers are pivoting from what they would have originally considered as admissions criteria at that time of year. And as Bob McMaster described, we have too. And that included my consultation with board leadership on the target that was board approved, because as a board approved target, we're not going to unilaterally stray from that target without consultation. So in order for Bob to even do what he's doing, we've softened the expectations for this year with regard to the historical ACT target. But we still look at metrics to make admissions decisions. We still are always going to look for students who fit what we're trying to accomplish. We exist in service, but that service includes meeting students where they are in order to advance their educational opportunities. There are still criteria for admission, and we're threading the needle, as all of our peers are, and as we are discussing regularly with our peers, around making sure that we bring in students who are going to be successful, and that we have the resources in order to assure their success, that the commitment we make to them around success, which of course is the cornerstone of the strategic plan that we'll discuss tomorrow, is a commitment that we can together as partners fulfill. And that includes all of our system campuses as well.
Thank you, President Gable, for that answer. We're gonna move forward, and I've got 4 more speakers, and we got to move with a little bit of urgency here, because we do have some action items that we have to take up before we break for the finance meeting. But Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Thank you, presenters. Excellent work done during these trying times makes it really easy to be proud of our great university. I have a couple of questions, maybe the first one for Provost Croson or Vice Provost McMaster, and then the second for Senior Vice President Kramer. Sorry. First one, I was asked to be on a Zoom call the other day with the veterinary class of 2021, their last year students. And they're very supportive of what's going on during these times, what the faculty and the administration has done there at the vet school during these times. But they have some concerns as their last year veterinary students. And one is the loss of hands-on experience with animals. The second is there's been 15+ hours of elective material canceled. They've additionally had a special 2-day class dealing with parturition canceled. More than 27 hours of hands-on laboratory services have been canceled. I talked to the Associate Dean and Co-Associate Dean of Affairs after this, about this, and assured, first of all, we were assured that full accreditation for these graduating vets in 2021, they'll be fully accredited. And they're going to look at rescheduling rotation sometimes in September, but dealing with times and normal schedules and everything, how is that all going to fulfill, what they were expecting? They're also going to work, the administration said, working to fulfill all educational experiences, but again, timing, so many hours of a day, how that's all going to happen. So these students were good about the tuition freeze, but they also wanted to talk about a tuition. We're one of the highest veterinary colleges tuition in the country. I think we're second or third highest. And part of that is because it's a great school and we do a lot of extra things that other colleges don't do. But they're also looking for possibility of tuition reduction or consideration for some tuition reimbursement for what they're missing out on. So that's my first question. Any comments on something like that for either Provost Croson or Vice Provost McMaster?
That it kind of gets in the category of hands-on experiential stuff, not just for veterinarian students, but for all of those. Provost Croson, you've only been here a short period of time. You probably don't know all the tuitions and everything. Could you comment at all just on the issues involved with some students maybe losing their hands-on experience because of COVID-19? Is that fair?
Absolutely. Chair Anderson, Regent Simonson, thanks so much for the question. So I would need to consult with Dean Mulligard of the vet school to see exactly what accommodations they've made in order to ensure that students are able to complete their education during this challenging time. I know that there are many degree programs across the university that include some level of experiential learning, as Chair Anderson has suggested. And for many of those, they've made alternative arrangements. Sometimes it's been a delay, sometimes it's been a virtual experience, sometimes it's been something else. I'm not personally familiar with exactly what the vet school has done, but I'm happy to look into it and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Simonson, next question.
Quickly for Senior Vice President Kramer. As you probably know, I'm down in Worthington, southwest corner, and the governor and our local senator and House of Representatives were here last week, and it was nice to be able to thank them for providing some money for that extra testing that you're doing over at the medical center. But quick questions, Dr. Kramer. On the PCR that we've developed in-house, which is obviously one of a kind, will that cover mutants? I think right now we have at least 2 mutants out there. Do we know about that? And then the second question is our relationship with private entities. I know we're working with Mayo, but like locally here in Stanford, and we've had the big shutdown. We're the second highest incident in the state as far as infection rates and testing for that. Are we working with private entities such as Stanford?
Senior Vice President Kramer, is that directed to you, I think?
Mm-hmm. Chair Anderson and Regent Simonson. So with respect to the RT-PCR, my understanding is that the primers that are used in the PCR itself are to multiple sections of the RNA. It's not just a single one. So you'd need a pretty significant mutation, I think, in order to knock out all sensitivity. And such mutations obviously might in fact render the virus no longer infective to cause COVID-19. So I don't think that's an enormous problem, although obviously viral replication and mutancy plays a terrific role as we try to fight various kinds of viruses. It is true that the current work that the state has funded is with Mayo, and that is both on the serology side as well as on the RT-PCR side. We're actively working with, I probably shouldn't name specifically yet, but in order to scale those, we sort of promised to the state that we'd be able to meet demand, certainly at the university, at Mayo, and indeed statewide, that in order to meet global demand, it requires way more capacity than we have. So in fact, we're licensing the serology as we speak. And the RT-PCR, I think, is quite general, frankly. It's not that that's a novel test at the moment. So that one is, everybody is sort of doing it the same way. So we don't have a particular relationship on that front.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Regent Simonson, for your questions. Regent Swigum, if you're still down to getting internet in Kenyon, Minnesota, you're welcome to have any comments you'd like.
We're
Hello. Is that my computer?
Anderson, I'll be very quick. Question of Bob, if I could. Bob, it's probably the third time I've asked this question, so I can take no, I can take yes. I just want to question the policy. I'm very, very glad we've shared 1,000 or thousands of names with other system campuses. Very, very glad about that, because I think we have to have a system view. I'm very glad that you've sent out 1,700, I think you said, offers to students on our wait list. I appreciate that. I assume if they're on our wait list, we think that they have an opportunity to succeed at the university. So sending out 1,700 is good. I just hope they don't, all 1,700 don't accept. We might have some capacity problems if that happens, but good for that. Bob, my question directly, like many of my colleagues have asked on enrollment, it's so very important. As we look at our wait list and as we share it, and as we do and share my app, the policy of saying to a prospective student, you know, we might not have room for you at the Carlson School at the university this year, or we might have not room at the engineering school this year, but if you'll go to one of the system campuses for a year and you show performance, you show that you can do the work, we'll guarantee you acceptance at the Minneapolis campus, at Carlson School, wherever, next year. We'll guarantee if you've proved yourself. That policy is, I can accept no, I can accept yes, but it seems to me to be a good policy. Can you, I've asked a couple times, can you respond to me on that policy or potential?
Vice Provost McMaster, please.
Sure. Chair Anderson and Regent Swigum. In theory, that's a beautiful model that you have come up with, that students could start on another campus and then have guaranteed admission into a upper division program here. That would not help the system campuses, and that they would be bringing students in as freshmen and then losing them. And so it would hurt both the retention and graduation rates and probably their bottom line finances. And B, for the programs you're talking about, engineering and Carlson, probably biological sciences, we just don't have the capacity here to take large numbers of students after we've accepted our own freshmen and our own transfer students. So we simply wouldn't be able to take in a flow of students from the other campuses. So I think on both sides of this, it's an interesting idea, but I'm just not sure operationally it would work.
Thank you.
Bob, real quickly, Mr. Chairman, if Chairman Anderson, I could, real quickly, Bob, as I try to get no or yes on this policy, and by the way, I can accept either. I've been told no many times in my life. Bob, to Duluth, she or he is going to like Duluth so much, or once they get to Morris, they're going to like Morris so much, they're not going to enact coming and the guarantee back to the or coming to the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, or St. Paul the second year. That's my personal feeling, that if you get them to Duluth, they're going to like Duluth. And I might be all wet, but I think that'd be true. And secondly, I shouldn't have mentioned the Carlson School for the UCLA, any other school. I think that just in general at the university, this policy would work. But again, I could take no.
So
I'll pass.
You know, I would just tell you that the theory, I think, sounds good, but and I'll let Vice Provost McMaster answer, but I think what is the problem if they don't like that other campus, or they had their heart set on coming to Twin Cities, and then we've got more students that we can make room for. Vice Provost McMaster, go ahead and answer that if I'm not correct in that.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question, Regent Anderson.
Well, it's basically Regent Swigham's that, his contention is they will go to Duluth, or they have their heart set on coming to Twin Cities, but they'll go to Duluth or go to Crookston or go to Morris if they don't get in, and they will like it so much that they will stay there. That may happen. The theory is, what if they still have their heart set on Minnesota and we've guaranteed them admission, and then we all of a sudden have all those students that we don't have room for? Is that the issue?
Yeah, precisely. That's the concern, is that we simply wouldn't have the capacity at that level. Though one other thing I'll mention here is that these are the kind of conversations that are going on with the System Enrollment Management Council that meets once a month. And in fact, my belief is we're coming to the board in June to give a system-wide update on a variety of initiatives, Share My App and joint marketing and talking about the curriculum. So in June, I think we could do a deep dive into some of these topics.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Student Representative Kraft, if he has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will keep my comments and question brief. And I would also like to extend a welcome to Provost Croson in this meeting. So regarding the SN grade basis, the extension to later in May, to May 22nd for Twin Cities undergraduate students to change that basis from an A to F to SN if they deem it appropriate after they see their final exam grades was specific to the Twin Cities undergraduates. And my student colleagues and I would appreciate if one of the presenters could speak to the rationale for that difference in the grade basis change across campuses, recognizing that that as the circumstances have evolved, that this has similarly been an evolving discussion as well. So that's my first question. I'll leave that.
Do you have more questions?
Just a very brief one related to the student technology survey findings.
Okay, so I think the first question, because system-wide, I think President Gable is probably most able to answer that. But President Gable, do you want to try on why no SN extensions on system campuses?
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Mr. Kraft, we are one university system, but we have a variety of academic policies from campus to campus. And so in making this decision, we deferred to the chancellors to work with their own shared governance within their own community. So this policy was implemented according to campus shared governance.
Thank you. Mr. Kraft, your second question.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll just reframe it as a comment regarding the nearly 5% of students not having access to a reliable computer. If I'm interpreting the survey results correctly, that's 5%, about 5% of those who responded. And I'm just thinking about the method by which this was administered, which is by a computer, or to respond via computer. And so I'm just looking at both that this was Twin Cities specific as well as the method by which the data was collected, just encouraging the university to look at those technological disparities and making sure that students across the system, that their needs are being met and addressed also on
I appreciate that comment, and I'm not aware of all of the issues with that, but I do know that we went to great lengths to find students' computers and everything like that. I mean,
yeah.
But you're basically saying that they were asked to respond to a survey by a computer they didn't have.
And I was not involved in the making of that survey, just based on my reading of the docket.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Student Representative Kraft. Thank you. Student Representative Patterson. Any questions?
Thank you, Chair. At this point, I have no questions.
Aren't you wonderful? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wow. So anyway, I'm going to tell you folks that what's happened with enrollment, research, academics, and the COVID-19 and the spring semester. Really, really important that we learn that. We have an idea where we've been. We have a road ahead of us. We don't exactly know where we're going, but I think it was really, really important you all got to ask those questions and get them answered by the panelists. I'll thank Senior Vice President Kramer, Vice Provost McMaster, Provost Croston, and President Gable for their fine and timely answers, and thank you. And that was really, really important stuff to go through. We took twice as much time as I thought we would have. However, we're going to move on to the next item, and we're not going to shorten this at all because this also is really, really important. It turns out, every May, we consider the recommendations for promotion and tenure of faculty and annual continuous appointments for academic professionals. I just want to remind you that today, this is for review and action. So we will listen to what Provost Croston says to us about it. There's been a lot of things in your docket, including names of individuals and movements from position to position. So I guess with no further ado, I'm going to ask Provost Croston to what she wants to tell us about promotion and tenure and the annual continuous appointments.
Thank you, Chair Anderson, members of the board. This is the annual report on our evaluations of faculty across the university system for promotion and tenure, and of academic professionals for continuous appointments. Under Board of Regents policy on faculty tenure, there are two types of faculty: regular faculty who are eligible for tenure, and term or contract faculty who are appointed annually or for several years. All faculty engage in scholarship, teaching, and service or public engagement, although there may be a different mix of those activities based on the faculty appointment. Faculty come from the best graduate programs around the country and the world, where they have undergone rigorous training. The search process is national and extensive. Once hired, junior faculty begin the probationary period. Probationary faculty establish a program of independent scholarship. Depending on their discipline, they publish peer review articles, books, book chapters, obtain a continuous stream of external grant funding, or produce exhibited creative works and artistic performance. They show that they've become effective teachers and advisors, and that through their efforts, they advance our mission of service and public engagement. In annual reviews during the probationary process, tenured faculty in the department discuss and vote on whether the candidates are making sufficient progress toward attaining tenure. If the department finds that insufficient progress is made during the probationary period, individuals are counseled about seeking other career routes, or their probationary appointment is terminated. Please go to the next slide. The formal tenure and promotion review process takes place during the mandatory decision year, typically during the 6th year of probationary service. Each candidate must compile a dossier demonstrating that they've met the specific criteria for tenure in their discipline. Evidence contained in the dossier includes teaching evaluations, samples of scholarship, and other relevant data. Several external reviewers in the discipline from comparable institutions in the United States and around the globe are asked to write independent review letters that become part of the candidate's file. Please go to the next slide. After reviewing a candidate's dossier, tenured faculty in the department vote on whether to recommend tenure and promotion. The dossier with the department vote tally is forwarded to a college or campus promotion and tenure committee, where there's another vote, subsequently to the dean and chancellor of the college or campus for an independent review and recommendation. The dean or chancellor recommendation is forwarded to the provost for a final review before this recommendation is submitted to the board. The process for promotion to professor is subject to an equally rigorous standard. As described in the docket, although this was an unusual year, none of the review processes for these 279 cases being recommended for promotion or tenure were abbreviated in any way. Go ahead to the next slide, please. The metric for tenure success that's used at the University of Minnesota is based on a comparison of the entering cohort of untenured professors in a given year and the percentage of the cohort who has attained tenure 7 years later. This gives us insight into the relative success of a cohort of probationary faculty. The number of untenured assistant professors who were recommended for tenure in their decision year is a fraction of the cohort that began. Every year, the tenure success rate is calculated on a 3-year rolling average. There were 252 faculty who began their appointments in this 3-year group. After 7 years, 53.6% had received tenure and were still employed at the university, and 5.6% had received tenure but had left the university. The 3-year average tenure success rate is thus 59.2%. Next slide, please. A small number of academic professionals have continuous appointments and go through probationary periods of 6 years. The majority of continuous appointments are librarians, as well as a few academic professionals in the law school clinics. Next slide, please. Chair Anderson, members of the board, I now present for your approval the following recommendations. That the regular faculty candidates on the list be approved for tenure or promotion as indicated. That the contract faculty candidates listed be approved for promotion to the rank indicated. And that the academic professional candidates listed receive continuous appointments and promotions as indicated. Next slide, please. In previous years, after the board's approval of the provost's recommendations, we've asked a panel of recently promoted faculty to briefly describe their scholarship. Given the circumstances this year, we're asking faculty members who've been promoted and tenured in this cycle to create short videos, so you'll be able to familiarize yourself with the extraordinary accomplishments of this group. We hope to have those ready for you prior to the June board meeting. Thank you, Chair Anderson and members of the board. This concludes my remarks. I recommend the tenure, promotion, and continuous appointment outlined in your docket for approval.
Thank you very much, Provost Croson. As I mentioned, this is a action item today. So before we get to any discussion, and we'll go through and let anybody have any comments or questions that they would like, I am going to entertain a motion, and I'll read the motion that I would like somebody to offer the motion and somebody to second. I'd entertain a motion to approve the promotion and or tenure of regular faculty, the promotion in rank of contract faculty, and the continuous appointment and promotion of the academic professional candidates as presented. Do I hear such a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, I heard Regent Davenport and Regent Kenyana. Do one of you want to be the second?
I'll take the second, Mr. Chair.
Well, I will.
You pick.
Tell our
Chair's choice.
Either one of them is the first and either one's the second. Thank you very much for doing that. So it has been moved and seconded to motion to approve the promotion and or tenure of regular faculty, the promotion and rank of contract faculty, and the continuous appointment and promotion of the academic professional candidates as presented. We're going to go with our discussion. And again, I'm going to go to the Regent members and ask if they have anything to say or comment on this. We're going to start with Regent Beeson.
No, I don't.
Thank you. Regent Davenport.
I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Herb.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do have a comment.
Okay.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge that to get to this point, supportive of the motion, but to get to this point takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and there's a lot of steps in the process. I just want to note that I'm looking at page 34, 35, and just looking at the demographics and the numbers and the breakdown, I am looking at this from, say, a first glance, and being and speaking to administration to encourage them to do more and to do better. Looking at particularly the promotion and the tenure of Native American, Alaskan Native professors, Hispanic and Black professors, I think we can do better. And I know that that's within our strategic plan, that we want to do better. We want to recruit, retain, and promote faculty of color. And so I am mindful of that, and I see these numbers and I see it as a starting point, and I really want to push us to go more and to do better. So thank you.
Regent Her, I'll take that as a comment, well noted, not a question. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Regent Kenyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I want to echo the congratulations to all the faculty that are receiving their hard-earned promotions. I did have a brief question, maybe a basic one on the process. So, I'm looking at, it starts with a vote of the peers in the department, and then the college might have a process, and the dean and so forth, all the way to the provost. Is that to mean that if a candidate fails at any level, I mean, let's say just right at the start, their peers don't approve them, it doesn't even go forward, or does it go forward and then the dean or the provost takes the holistic view of the votes at each level?
Provost Grossman, would you comment briefly on the process?
Yes, of course. So it is absolutely true that your second point is the true one. Sorry, Chair Anderson, Regent Kenyana, your point is correct that even if there is a negative vote, the candidate can continue in the process.
Okay.
And then the provost office looks at it holistically.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Regent Kenyana?
It does. I knew the answer. I was asking for Regent Swingham's benefit, but that's fine.
You're just enlightening the rest of us.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Regent Mayor.
Thank you.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent McMillan.
No questions.
Thank you. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for coming back to me.
I forgot you. I was looking at that.
Maybe you spelled my name wrong. I don't know. I have a question piggybacking on what Regent Her was asking about. Do we have a demographic breakdown of the people up for these promotions? And if not, why wouldn't we be able to develop that?
Regent Grossen, is that?
Chair Anderson, Regent Hsu, we do indeed have a demographic breakdown of everybody who would be eligible for promotion and could apply. That's not part of your docket, but I can certainly get that data if you would like it.
Yeah, that would be great if we could get it, but I think we're voting on this right now, which I guess is neither here nor there. It would be just nice information to have. On my next question, so in the audit committee meeting this morning, I asked a question about a memo that I had received regarding EOAA investigations that had been open for a long time, and my understanding is that there is at least one case of someone whose promotion may be affected by delays in EOAA investigations. I'm just wondering, this is a once a year thing, so are we talking about moving this person to another cycle, or how does it work that if they're being delayed due to EOAA delays?
Provost Grossen.
Here we go. Chair Anderson, Regent Hsu. My understanding about the process here at the University of Minnesota is that there are often consent items for additional tenure and promotion decisions that come before the board at each of its meetings. This is by far the largest one on the broad slate, but that when we, for example, hire people out of cycle, right, in the middle of the year, or in for other reasons, their promotion and tenure case was delayed, there is an opportunity for them to come up before the board for approval before the next year.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, Regent Hsu, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for that answer. I think that makes sense. I was under the impression that maybe they would have to wait a year, which I think would be unfair. So thank you very much.
That concludes your questions, Regent Chu?
Yes.
Thank you. I think I got an answer from Regent McMillan. I don't want to skip anybody again. Regent Powell.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Anderson, and congratulations to everyone who's being put forward. I have no questions and support the resolution.
Thank you very much, Regent Powell. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually one of my favorite votes as a member of the board because of the things that's cited by others, the amount of work and the professional accomplishment of these individuals. And so I want to ask a couple questions, and I don't want it to feel like it's loaded at all in relation to the people that are in front of us. But I think a question that folks outside the university would think is a fair one is to ask the question about how this impacts how we're going to deal with the current situation that we're facing as an institution, particularly the economic component. And so I would welcome a quick comment by General Counsel if on the line to talk about, by granting tenure and particularly because it's such a significant contractual enterprise, to what extent, how does that impact our ability to address some of the things that we may be having to make decisions about if the pandemic lasts another year or more? We know the financial considerations will be dramatic. And I think some people outside the university might say, you're entering into these, very lengthy, if not lifelong contracts with folks at a time when you may have to have some flexibility. And would it make more sense to take a pause as we are on a number of other things? And so again, no statement at all about the quality of these exceptional folks, but I do think the board should at least be aware of what the implications are and be wide-eyed as if we decide to enter into these agreements at a time when we have some significant financial uncertainty.
Before I go and ask if General Counsel Peterson is there or if somebody else can answer it, do you want to state your second question? Does that fall on after you get
that is my question. I have just but the one. I have absolutely zero reason to be anything other than ecstatic about the quality of folks that we have. I think a couple of our colleagues have raised very important questions about the demographics that we we do discuss year after year over decades, frankly, and we need to keep working at it. But my specific question is, what's the impact if we were to say
what is the bias to go?
Maybe we wait. I understand that would have dramatic impacts on these individuals, and that can maybe be spoken to by Provost Croson or President Gable. But I would like to just have the General Counsel explain to us that by providing tenure, that it does have significant impacts for our ability to address some of the cost issues that we may be facing.
So that's a question. If General Counsel Peterson is there, I'd ask him to maybe answer that at this point. I don't know if he's online with us, or President Gable. Are you there that can tell us what the economic impact of this is?
Chair Anderson, Regent Rocha, I can't speak. I won't speak as General Counsel, obviously, and have to be especially careful given my training and licensure or lack thereof. But from an economic point of view, you'll see a discussion out of the first phase of the Finance and Operations Working Group that presumes contributions by faculty, whether they are tenured or untenured. The decision around tenure itself is not, in my observation, dispositive to the coping mechanisms that we have that give us the capacity to meet the challenge in any way that we've been able to project it, even at its most extreme. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can just follow up, that's very helpful. So, I mean, the part of the challenge here, of course, is that, we've talked about stringency, we've talked about, some of the tools in the toolbox, so to speak, if things, continue to decline. And so you're, just to make sure I understand, you're not concerned at all, the fact that once tenure is granted, any sort of cutbacks that would be required based on just financial reality, you think that the tools that we have available as an institution to ensure the long-term success of the institution would be able to handle any issues that are in front of us, separate from saying, well, we're going to take a time out here because we need to maintain that flexibility. Am I understanding that right?
President Gable?
Chair Anderson, Regent Rocha, essentially, I'm concerned, we are all concerned, and there is no question that we will have to make difficult choices, but the addition of these few faculty to the overall composition of which of our faculty are tenured or untenured is not the thing that increases or decreases my concern.
Okay. I think that's Regent Rocha.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair Anderson.
Okay. Regent Simonson.
Thank you. No comment.
Thank you. Regent Sviggum.
Mr. Chair, General Counsel Peterson is joining us to address that question. So
terrific. I didn't know if he was with us, but I'm glad he is. I'll give the floor to General Counsel Peterson. Regent Sviggum, if you would hold.
Good morning, everyone. I have lag time on my audio, so I apologize. But Regent Rocha and Chair Anderson, I believe President Gable's sort of economic and policy answer is really the core response, and I certainly turn to Regent Rocha. I mean, as you all appreciate, there are various sort of considerations you need to keep into account. I mean, take into account. One are the sort of the policies that work within the university as you're considering fiscal stringency and fiscal emergency, and the various levers you have that are consistent with each of those options. We also have, under consideration the receipt of CARES Act money, which carries some provisos with it, call for the university to try to maintain employment to the greatest extent practicable. Every business decision you make in this environment has an impact on that calculus. So I think at each step you need to evaluate, what economic burdens and costs you can bear in this particular pandemic. And President Gable's response to me is the business response that gives you the information, hopefully, that you need in determining whether or not you can take this particular step and judge how much it might handcuff you in terms of the other options that you're afforded, either given the limitations of the CARES Act or limitations of board policy, depending on, again, which path you opt to take. So, that gives you the general lay of the land. I don't think it leads to any specific legal direction with regard to this particular request, because it does strike me as it's more of an economic and policy question than a legal one at this point.
Thank you, General Counsel Peterson, for your advice and your comment. Regent Rocha, are you okay? That answer? Or do you have another question?
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Well, just again, as I'm thinking about it, I think there is a significant legal component, only to the extent that, right now, when we're largely not on campus and so on, I just think about our capacity to do things, whether it's furlough or otherwise, while we're, again, trying to understand how to come out of this thing as whole as possible. So I appreciate the president's response in terms of the number and the impact overall and so on. But again, I want to be really clear that we're looking at this and saying this is a risk we're willing to take, because the upside is we're getting these outstanding folks on their career paths. I don't know that right now we're in a particularly competitive environment. I don't think many institutions are looking to grow right now. So so that I don't think is necessarily part of the calculus, but recognizing the capacity of this group of exceptional folks is important. I'm just wondering, just again, it's a lot of dollars and cents right now, and I think the legal implications of tenure do play a role in that. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
It's an important question, and it's a contractual obligation we're going to have going forward. So there's nothing wrong with that. Now I'll call on Regent Sviggum. Maybe. Hello?
Mr. Chairman, I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we've had an opportunity to speak. We've got a motion on the table, and our meeting is being held electronically, and according to the open meeting law, it requires that we record roll call votes. So unless there's a reason not to at this time, I'll ask Ms. Flatten to call the roll.
Mr. Chair, I believe when you were calling on Regents, you skipped Regent Simonson, and then Regent Kenyanya appears to have a follow-up question. So if you want to get those two.
I believe Regent Simonson passed, but we can go back to Regent Kenyanya if I was incorrect. But Regent Simonson, you did pass?
I did pass.
Okay.
Okay, go back to Regent Kenyanya then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for pointing that out, Maggie. I was just gonna, not necessarily related to today's motion, but for the administration, maybe down the line, I would appreciate a refresher, an overview on tenure, a really robust discussion. I think, you know, I was being facetious earlier, but you know, there's things I don't know, and I imagine my colleagues might share that. So maybe down the line, I think it'd be appropriate to have just a really robust discussion on the ins and outs of tenure. But thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Well noted. At this time, then, you know, we've moved and seconded the motion. Ms. Flatten, do you want to call the roll?
Mr. Chair, I apologize. One more oversight here. Did you want to call on the student representatives for comments and questions on this item?
I didn't think I was going to, simply because it's a voting issue and it wasn't just a comment on university, but I'm happy to, and I'm happy to ask them if they want to. I have no reason not to. So I don't know if Representative Kraft or Representative Patterson have anything to say. You're welcome to have the chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Maggie. I do not have any questions at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also do not have any comments.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Flatten, will you call the roll?
Yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Her.
Yes.
Regent Her votes yes. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent McMillan.
Yes.
Regent McMillan votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair Anderson.
Yes.
Chair Anderson votes yes. Mr. Chair, there are 12 yeses and 0 nos.
Thank you. That motion passes. We're going to now move to the consent report. And I do want to say that we're going to be a little bit overboard here on time, and that's okay. I'm going to call on Regent McMillan in a little while to explain about finance meeting. But for now, let's go to the consent report. I'm not going to go through the entire roster for discussion on this item. Rather, if you're interested in asking a question or making a comment, use the raise your hand feature on your Zoom. Very briefly, I'll ask Provost, it's also a action item. So I'll ask Provost Croson to provide a brief introduction of the items in the consent report. And I guess while she does that, signal if you have a question or comment. Provost Croson.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Thank you, Board. The May consent report more than typical, in part due to a catalog update, which occurs every 2 years and is currently underway. Highlights from the consent report include a Master of Professional Studies degree in Nutritional Sciences offered by CFANS, a host of graduate professional certificates related to management education and business taxation, undergraduate minors in cell biology and genetics, and a Bachelor of Science in Equine Business Management and a Bachelor of Science in Applied Health on the Crookston campus. I also want to point out there are 8 programs scheduled for discontinuation, 4 on the Twin Cities campus, 2 on the Duluth campus, and 2 on the Crookston campus. Chair Anderson, I recommend the consent agenda for your approval.
Thank you, Provost. Is there a motion to approve the consent report?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay. It's moved and seconded. I'm just gonna, we've got a motion on the floor. Ms. Flatten, do we have any hands raised to ask questions?
Mr. Chair, we don't.
Okay. So would you, Ms. Flatten, call the roll call vote?
Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Her.
Yes.
Regent Her votes yes. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent McMillan.
Yes.
Regent McMillan votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, there are 12 yeses and 0 nos.
The consent report passes. Thank you. And finally, I'm going to ask, you all have information items in your docket. Provost Croson, did you want to speak to any of them?
Thank you, Chair Anderson, members of the board. While quite understandably, we are all focused on the important aspects of COVID-19 and its impact, this information report reminds us of the exceptional work of our university community and how that work and its recognition continue even in the face of this pandemic. If you haven't had the opportunity to look at these items, I encourage you to do so. Among the many achievements, you'll see that Graham Candler, Professor of Aerospace Engineering, has been elected to the National Academy of Engineering, and 5 other faculty have been elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. These are extremely prestigious honors, and as a result, we now have 9 current faculty in the National Academy of Engineering and 28 currently active faculty in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We also have 14 faculty who are elected members of the National Academy of Sciences and 12 who are members of the National Academy of Medicine. I also want to call out the generous donations we've received from many of our supporters. In times of uncertain stock market and declining economic activity, these acts of generosity are truly inspiring. Thank you, Chair Anderson.
Thank you, Provost Croson. So we went a little longer than I thought we would, and we do have finance and operations coming up here shortly. I am going to call on Chair of Finance and Operations, Regent McMillan. Regent McMillan, do you have a time you want to get started?
Yes, thank you, Chair Anderson. After consulting with board staff, we're going to slow the start of that meeting down. We'll take a half-an-hour break now. So we'll begin at 1:15. You had a very hefty agenda here. We have a equally, if not more hefty agenda in finance and operations. So I don't want to delay more than that, recognizing half an hour is not a lot of time, but everybody can get a break and get something to eat. And we'll reconvene at 1:15 rather than 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. With that, mission fulfillment meeting is adjourned. Thank you.